Intelligence chiefs, the Kremlin ran a covert operation aiming to influence the US presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. Well, if they did, it worked. But was it really so? What is the truth behind the swirl of allegations? And what now for Russia-US relations? Well, I'm going to the Kremlin to meet Vladimir Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov. Is he triumphant or cautious? Dmitry Peskov, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. Hello.
Do you care that a host of Western intelligence agencies have accused your government of sophisticated covert operations, dirty tricks, meddling in their internal politics? Do you care?
You mean cyber attacks?
Cyber attacks? Not just cyber attacks, but cyber attacks have been one very big part of it. Let's talk about the United States, first of all.
Yes. So, we have to be very precise in wording. You're speaking about secret services and special services of all the major states. No, we're speaking about only the United States of America and some retired gentlemen who used to work in MI6 or MI5, I don't know exactly, from Great Britain. The rest of special services in European countries, they have never accused Russia of interfering into somewhere. They have just started to feel uncomfortable,
well,
as they say, in front of allegations.
That's not strictly true. What you've just said isn't strictly true. Let me just quote to you one example. Bruno Kahl, who is currently chief of Germany's Foreign Intelligence Agency, said this, a direct quote: "Cyber attacks are taking place that have no purpose other than to elicit political uncertainty here in Germany. The indications show the attacks come from Russia. There is evidence that this is at least tolerated or desired by the state."
Well, again, accusations that have nothing beneath. So we don't have any proof known for those blamings.
But it is interesting that you began by saying it's only the United States, but it's clearly not only the United States.
Well, the whole story started from the United States, and the whole hysteria is being pumped up by the United States public opinion, United States media. It's very emotional hysteria. And, you know, sometimes it is even, it comes quite ridiculous to us to watch this hysteria.
James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence in the US, says that the evidence is there with a very high degree of certainty. Now, admittedly, we haven't seen the evidence because the key evidence has been redacted. But what he says is this: "I do not think, based on the evidence, that we have ever encountered a more aggressive, a more direct campaign to interfere in our election process." And that's at your door. And indeed, you, Dmitry Peskov, have been accused of being one of the key architects of this campaign.
Well, it's a great honor for me to be so sophisticated. I'm not that sophisticated in cyber business. So, this is not the truth. This is number one. Number two, every day we have hundreds and thousands of cyber attacks against our digital systems in the Russian Federation. Some of them are coming from the territory of the United States. Dozens are coming from the territory of Germany. Dozens coming from Great Britain. Do you think that it means, with a high state of certainty, that those attacks against our digital systems are being promoted by the governments in Washington, in London, or in Berlin? No. You would probably say no. It's out of question. It's out of possibility.
I'm more interested in what you think. What do you think?
We think that it has nothing to do with the governments. Although we also have some evidence that some foreign special services might stand behind some very, very tense attacks against our banks and against our, our official website.
So are you trying to tell me that the Russian actions in the United States, in Germany, we believe in Britain too, according to our intelligence agencies, are they retaliation?
No, there are no actions. There are no actions. And neither Russian government, nor Kremlin, nor President Putin personally, nor military intelligence stand behind those attacks, if they really exist.
That is a very clear position you've just taken. Now, the United States Congress is going to, over the next few weeks and months, conduct a very serious investigation of all of these allegations of Russian cyber hacking.
Yeah.
They are going to use subpoenas. We may well find a lot more very specific information. If it turns out that they have convincing evidence that Russia, the Kremlin, was involved in authorizing those attacks, you are going to be very badly exposed, aren't you?
Of course. I'm carrying responsibility for saying that. I'm not an irresponsible person. I'm working as a press secretary of President Putin. I work in Kremlin and I'm responsible for my words. So should there be any evidence, should there be any proof, then it will be my responsibility. It should be either proved or it should be dismissed.
How disturbed were you when Donald Trump appeared to say just a few days ago that he now believes Russia is responsible for the hacking of the DNC emails?
President-elect was briefed by his special services. We do not know what exactly was presented to him during those briefings. What we had access to was the public part of the report. You would probably have read that public part.
I've read the public part, and as I said, we don't know what the redacted parts include.
Yes, public part was quite vague. You would probably agree with me. It was based on assumptions, not on evidence. So let's wait and see.
On the hacking, John McCain and a bunch of Republican and Democratic senators have said
Great admirer of my country.
Well, perhaps not the greatest admirer of your country right now.
Yeah.
But he has said, and they have said, that they are going to push forward what they're calling Countering Russian Hostilities Act 2017. They are going to push for an expansion of sanctions against Russia, specifically targeting those they believe responsible for the hacking. How will you respond if that legislation, if that expansion of sanctions goes through?
So this is quite an unprecedented act. What is being done by the going President Obama, by renewing the sanctions against Russia without waiting until the period of the existing one expires, and with the new law, coming in Senate, so they are trying to limit the capacity to limit the presidency of Trump. They're trying to push him into the way of bad relationship with Moscow. So they say, you don't have a possibility to move, you don't have a possibility to choose your own position, you will follow our way.
Which brings me to the most important question today around the world, but particularly concerning your relationship with the United States. Do you believe President Donald Trump will bring with him a fundamental change, a fundamental shift in the relationship between Washington and Moscow?
Unfortunately, we cannot believe. What we can do is we can express our hope. We want to have good relationship with America. We believe that we cannot solve lots of problems in this world and in our region that are endangering our country without cooperation with the Americans. That's why we desperately need good relationship with Washington. But it takes two to tango. And what will be the approach by President Trump? This is the question.
We speak on the eve of the inauguration. Will you and your boss, President Putin, be popping the champagne corks when you watch the inauguration of President Trump?
Well, you know, we are preoccupied these days. We have our Christian holiday called baptizing. So we're preoccupied with swimming in the ice cold water. So that's why our agenda is a little bit different.
Let's allow ourselves to just think what it means in greater detail. Donald Trump has talked about his admiration for Vladimir Putin, calls him a smart guy.
Yeah.
But getting away from the positives, looking at perhaps a more realistic agenda, some of his key nominees for the top posts, that of Secretary of State, Defense Secretary, head of the CIA, have all said very clearly they still regard Russia as the most important threat. General Mattis, Defense Secretary nominee, said that he still believes that Russia poses a severe threat to Europe's security and to NATO.
Well, listen, you cannot leave and you cannot develop yourself as personality in one environment and all of a sudden come to a different conclusion. You are a child of your environment, and environment in the United States currently is very hostile towards Russia. So we understand those statements. We do not expect President Trump and his administration to agree with us, even to agree with us on the majority of problems. But we want to believe that they will be ready to talk to us. So we want to be able to convey our message to Washington, and we want Washington to will to convey their message to us by explaining why, what exactly, how, when, and with whom. So if we don't know that, we feel ourselves endangered.
Donald Trump is known and prides himself on being a deal maker. He's already begun to indicate there might be deals to be done. For example, he suggested to the Times newspaper just the other day that perhaps he would consider easing sanctions on Russia if Russia was prepared to talk seriously about reducing its nuclear arsenal as part of a new round of nuclear talks. You interested here in Russia in that sort of approach?
Well, it's a little bit different dimensions, you know, different pillars in our relationship. I mean, sanctions is one thing. Russia will not ever initiate discussing of the issue.
On Ukraine, which is the reason why the sanctions sit there, your position on Ukraine appears unchanging. What the West wants to see, we don't know whether Donald Trump wants to see it, but what the West generally wants to see is you finally make every effort to implement that Minsk peace agreement and actually stop your support for the separatists in eastern Ukraine.
Well, the problem is that we are not the country who is going to, who should implement Minsk agreement. We're a country that should guarantee implementation of Minsk agreement together with the French and with the Germans. Minsk agreement should be implemented by Kiev and by the guys from Donbass. And Minsk agreements are not something vague. It's not...
the guys from the Donbass just take your instructions, so why don't you get along and instruct them on what you want, which
yes,
if you want...
we enjoy some influence, but we cannot ask them to die.
There's been a lot of talk about the possibility of a very early summit meeting between Mr. Putin and soon-to-be President Trump. Is it going to happen?
Well, we hope that President Putin is going to call President Trump after the inauguration as soon as he is available and congratulate him. It's a protocol issue, so this congratulation should be delivered. We hope it will be delivered through a telephone call, and then we'll expect their exchange of views on a possibility of the meeting.
What kind of time frame are we talking about?
Well, currently we don't have any hints for the place or for the dates, unfortunately.
Are we talking weeks, months?
Well, we hope. No, I don't think weeks. Of course, I mean it's a president. He's a president of the United States, and first of all, he's preoccupied with American business. It's like our president. You asked me what are we going to do tomorrow during the inauguration. We're going to be preoccupied with Russian affairs, because they are issue of priority for President Putin. So it's not coming weeks. But let's hope for the best that this meeting could take place coming month.
Coming months. And
Yes.
to be clear about it, President Putin would like the earliest possible meeting with Mr. Trump face to face.
I have no doubt President Putin will be ready for that. Yes.
One other interesting, just specific point. Just yesterday, it was announced here in Russia that Edward Snowden had been given a couple more years of residency here in Russia.
Yes.
Some people have said, you know, one way of warming up relations very quickly between Putin and Trump would be for Mr. Putin to, in essence, give Edward Snowden to the incoming Trump administration as some sort of show of goodwill. Because, of course, in America, they want to put him on trial, and Donald Trump has made it plain that he personally believes Edward Snowden should be punished for the release of secret information.
Well, Edward Snowden is a human being. He's a human being that can face a death penalty in the United States, because it's one of the few countries that still exercises death penalty.
You'll never extradite him, is that what you're saying?
This is a decision that can be taken by our immigration authorities or President Putin. I don't know, but he's not a toy to be presented. He's a human being.
Let's talk about NATO as we go around the themes that are going to be presented to Trump and Putin as they consider their relationship. Donald Trump, again, hard to read. He said NATO is obsolete. He's also said NATO is very important to him. His generals tell him that Russia poses a direct threat, the way that you've massed both weaponry, materiel, and manpower on NATO's eastern flank. Are you prepared to show, again, good faith by, for example, pulling your Iskander missiles out of Kaliningrad?
It is a very complicated issue. You cannot just withdraw those missiles from Kaliningrad without knowing that plans for creating entire missile system will be abolished on the European continent.
Just one final point on diplomacy then, again about dialogue. It's about Syria. It is very notable that in your initiative with the Turks to get some sort of dialogue going between the government and the rebels, which of course led to the ceasefire, the Americans weren't involved at all. Now there are more peace talks scheduled for Kazakhstan next week.
Yes.
Do you definitely want the Americans under the new Trump administration to be involved, to be big players alongside you and the Turks?
Well, definitely we would welcome that. We would welcome that. Situation is very complicated. You know that also there is Iran, like a very important player in Syrian issue.
The Iranians say the Americans
Iranians
won't be.
are not welcoming Americans. So it's a very complicated issue for a very careful play.
You and I, in previous conversations, have gone into great detail about accusations that Russia has committed human rights violations, some say war crimes, in its military activities in Syria. I just want one simple question on this. Since we last spoke, the UN General Assembly has voted to establish an investigative body to collect, consolidate and preserve, they say, evidence and prepare cases on war crimes and human rights abuses. Will you cooperate with that UN investigation?
I have no doubt, yes. I have no doubt, yes. Should it be started, and what will be the composition of that?
Because your people at the UN were gravely skeptical that it should be started in the first place, but you're now saying, U-turn, we've decided we are going to fully cooperate.
No, we haven't decided. We haven't decided. But theoretically, I say theoretically, we would welcome those investigations.
A final thought, and I want to take it away from the international arena to the domestic arena. I just spoke to Alexei Navalny, perhaps the leading voice in opposition to President Putin in this country today, a man who has declared he wants to run in the presidential election slated for 2018 against Putin. He said to me, you know why Putin fights these wars, why he is projecting Russia's power in different arenas around the world? He is trying to distract the Russian people from what is going on inside their own country. The millions and millions condemned to live in poverty. the systemic corruption, which is seeing a tiny elite at the top enriching themselves on the back of the majority of Russians who see no growth, no prosperity. That's what he's going to campaign on, and that is going to cause you and your boss a great deal of trouble.
Well, you know, unfortunately, we have a very weak opposition in our country.
I wonder why that is. Could it be because they're not allowed access to state television, for example?
No, it's not about state television. Well, you have modern media. You have modern media, and viewership of television is diminishing day by day.
In Russia today, if you switch on the TV and you want to find an opposition voice, it is almost impossible.
American president is winning elections using Twitter. In order to be a successful opposition, you have to be sustainable. You have to have a program of development of the country.
You also have to be allowed a semblance of freedom. You have to be a person who is not at risk of being assassinated, as Boris Nemtsov was, just 100 meters from the Kremlin. You have to be a guy, unlike Alexei Navalny, who finds his brother is locked up on trumped-up charges and he himself is facing more trumped-up charges. You need a space, a freedom to operate and build a political movement. In Russia today, you know as well as I do, that's impossible.
Why don't you think that they are not fair charges?
Because the European Court of Human Rights has declared that they are political, and it said that they were illegitimate.
We don't agree with that. We don't agree with that.
You don't agree with the European Court of Human Rights when they analyze all of the evidence?
I'd rather trust our own court. And we do have much more confidence in our own court system.
Do you read Alexei Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation website?
Once in a while, yes.
You'll have seen your own name up there recently.
Yeah, most frequently.
Yeah, he wants to know how come a guy like you, a public servant on a, you know, not bad but modest salary, how you come you live in a villa, which he's very pleased to show me, you know, which is worth, he says, because he's spoken to the realtors, $15 million. And of course, the very famous watch of yours, which was worth £400,000.
Try to double check it with different real estate agencies. Try to double check that.
Do you want to tell me how much your villa is worth? I'm very happy to take your estimate.
If we're here to discuss the cost of my villa, I hope it's quite expensive.
And we're almost out of time, so we have to wrap this up. Putin, up for re-election in 2018. Can you guarantee to me that Alexei Navalny will at least be allowed to run in that election and challenge Putin?
I'm not head of a Central Election Committee that can guarantee that or not guarantee that. So that's why I'm not entitled to make this kind of statements.
Do you believe it would be best for Russia if an opposition leader like Navalny were allowed to run against Putin?
I think it will be best for Russia if we have a serious opposition with a serious approach, with experienced professionals and politicians trying to compete with acting power in the face of President Putin, who is being supported by 90% of this population.
I'm taking from that last answer that there's no question President Putin will run for another term in 2018.
You know, it was our first interview, and I told you there was 2004, I think, or whatever.
No,
I told
I'm
you,
not quite that
as
old
a
on
citizen of the Russian Federation, I hope that he will take a decision to run.
We have to end there. Dmitry Peskov, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.